Congratulations.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, great job, kiddo.
Thanks, Grandpa.
So, what's your 15-year plan?
Oh no, not this again.
Do you have a job yet?
Give me some time. Every time he comes over, he makes me feel like a kid again.
I don't know. Jobs seem hard.
Your estimated wait time is 97 minutes.
97 minutes? Come on!
All right, here it is. I pulled the MLS data on this luxurious short sale, and it seems to be priced pretty appropriately according to the CMA, and depending on your DP, you may not even have to pay PMI.
Huh? She really is beautiful.
Thank you. Got it?
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
You got it from here, okay? All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Honey, honey.
Sir, what's your number?
What number?
Next.
I thought refills on juice were free.
I'll go ask my manager.
Good.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Oh my goodness, are you okay?
Adulting is hard.
Several weeks ago, I was watching a Brene Brown special about relationships. And if you're not familiar with Brene is a researcher. She's got her PhD in social work. She is a professor at my alma mater, the University of Houston. Any Cougs in the house? Go Cougs. Just all 5 of us and you know, Brene, which is awesome. Hey, welcome. But I was watching the special, and she was talking about relationships, and in this special, she was talking about this like secret ingredient. This ingredient that just really makes relationships great. Not perfect, but makes relationships better. And during this talk, she introduced this phrase that I've just never heard before. She said this phrase, she said, marble jar friends. Like, it's important for us to have these marble jar friends. And I thought, I wonder what this means. What are you getting at, Brene? And she began to talk a little bit more, and she said, marble jar friends are those friends who consistently make deposits of these kind of marbles in your life. It's those kind of friends who are there for you in the good times, and those kind of friends who are there for you in the difficult times. It's those friends who actually text you back. You know those friends? It's those friends who actually call you back. You left that voicemail and it's a hard or difficult time. They actually call you back. It's those friends who are willing just to listen to you. It's those friends who are willing to save you a seat when there's no seats available. And we could go on and on, but she began to describe these friends like these marble jar friends and this kind of secret ingredient. And I thought, wow, I've just never thought of it that way. Just one deposit after another of these marbles. And then I thought to myself, you know, I've got some marble jar friends. And I began to think about who they were and, you know, when they became a marble jar friend. And I thought of this one particular story that happened about 10 years ago when one of my friends kind of moved categorically into a marble jar friend. And 10 years ago, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in this boardroom, so think of kind of a boardroom conference room. And around the table were about 8 guys who I so respected. And these 8 guys around the table were very influential in my life, were kind of mentors, or some of them were like father figures. I'd been on the other side of these guys for a long, long time. And they were very influential as well in the city of Austin. So, you know, it's just a cool moment that we were around this table. And then there was my friend, and he was sitting with me. And so we were having this conversation, and the conversation began to turn. And the conversation began to become very robust and a difficult conversation. And before long, out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking, and there's one gentleman who's in charge. And he begins to pound on the table. And he says, Buck, you're a liar. You're a liar. You're lying about everything. And I sat there and I was like, how in the world did we get here? And I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, you know, I know you a little bit, but like, how dare you? Like, why wouldn't you ask me more questions? Why are you putting these accusations on the table? And then I looked, in front of me was another gentleman that I'd sat on the other side of for so long, and he was an older man, and he just poured into my life, and he just sat there silently. I thought to myself, why don't you speak up? And then there was another man in the room, an older gentleman, who I've been on the other side of for a long time, and he knew the truth. But he didn't say a single word, because if he was going to tell the truth, it was going to cost him his job. And I sat there and I was like, there's nothing I can do. There's no defense. There's no just pushback. They've already made up their minds. And then all of a sudden, my friend, he pauses and he speaks up. And he says, gentlemen, I have been around Buck for a long time. And guys, you are throwing some big accusations his way, and it's just not consistent with his character. And then he said, would you mind us just taking a few days and just like looking at these things that you're accusing him of, and then we could meet again and talk about this? And I thought in that moment, wow, that was a massive deposit that my friend made. And over the next couple days, which actually turned into the next few weeks, we spent a ton of time together, and we had lots of conversations, lots of things took place. And he publicly and he privately defended me over and over and over. And I just thought, wow, that's a marble jar friend. And I've got a few of those guys in my life. And I would imagine the same is true with you, that there are people in your life that you feel like, man, these are kind of marble jar friends. They're just well beyond just an acquaintance or just a friend. I mean, friends are great, but these people, wow, there's just this thing about them. Or if you don't have those individuals in your life that you can just share things, you can share your vault and not worry about them gossiping about your vault. Like if there are those people, if you don't have that in your life, I mean, isn't it true you want that? Isn't it true you just want that person that's almost like family, but they're a friend, but they're like closer than a friend. They're just like family. They're that marble jar friend. And see, my question is this, is what is that secret ingredient? What is that thing that Brene was talking about? What's that thing that moves somebody, from just an acquaintance to somebody who you would just go, oh my gosh, they are a marble jar friend. They show up for me. They're available. They save me a seat. They visit my mother in the hospital because they know that's meaningful to me. I mean, they're just that kind of individual. What is it? What's the secret ingredient? It's one word. It's trust. It's trust. Now, trust is such an interesting word. It's so broad, it's so big, it's so huge. And in fact, when it comes to trust is one of the most commonly used words in the English language. In fact, if you went on Google and you just searched trust, what you would find is that there's over 1.8 billion results. There's a lot of thoughts and a lot of opinions, when it comes to trust. If you went on Amazon.com and went to their book section and searched trust, there's over 60,000 books on trust. This is a big, big topic. And if you begin to do the research and started to look and read those books, which I don't think any of us would read all 60,000 plus books, but if you looked at the research, there's so many interesting things about trust. And one of the things I came across this week, just in the research when it comes to trust, is the fact that the most desirable quality people are looking for in a partner when dating is. And if we were to ask this question to, all of us, and we were, I think there would be a lot of opinion. I think, we would assume and project like, it's about their looks. Like that's the big quality. Like, do they look good? Is she hot? Is he hot? That kind of thing. Or, what kind of job does he have? What's his bank account like? What kind of job does she have? What's her bank account like? What do they drive? Where do they live? What are their ambitions and goals in life? Does he have really chiseled abs? I think we may ask. I don't know. Anyways, but that you get the point. Like that's what we would think. But you see, all the research across the board says there is one thing we're looking for, and there is not even a close second place. The number one thing we're looking for is trustworthiness. Is this person a person I can trust with my children? Is this person a person I can trust to be faithful? Is this person a person I can trust to spend the rest of my life with? Because that's the kind of person I'm looking for. And guys, I'm just telling you, when trust is part of the adulting equation, in your life and my life, when we begin to make deposits of trust, or trust is just very present in our adulting years, it makes adulting so much better. It really does. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's also true. When you begin to suck trust out, like think of this big needle going in, and you suck trust out of relationships, those parenting relationships, those dating relationships, those friendships, or just your adulting years, and you're not building trust in your own life, at the end of the day, the outcome is adulting is so incredibly difficult. And when trust isn't present, it is exponentially more difficult. In fact, again, there's all kinds of research on this. And this week I came across a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Gottman. And Dr. Gottman, this is what he looks like. And when I saw this picture, I was like, this is a guy I feel like I can trust. You know, I just saw the picture, and I'm like, this is a guy I feel like I would sit across from, and he would just be wise. Like, whatever I'd say, he would just, reflect something so brilliant, right? But he really is a brilliant man. He's a very smart man. He's got his PhD in psychology. He's been studying relationships. Specifically, that's his area of expertise, relationships, when they go south, when trust isn't present, all that kind of stuff. And he's been studying for over 40 years. And Dr. Gottman, this is amazing. He was voted one of the top 10 therapists over the last quarter century. Like, he is so influential. And guys, if you haven't read any of his stuff, I get no benefit from this. It's just helpful and it's practical. I mean, I would highly encourage you to read or listen to Dr. Gottman. So, Dr. Gottman does all this research, and I read one of the things, and here's what he says. He says this. He says, in terms of relationships, just about all conflicts in marriage are about trust. And he went on and he broadened this, and he said just about all conflicts in friendships and parenting relationships and marriage relationships. I mean, just the whole thing. He said like 99.9% of the time, the issue has to do with trust. It's the idea of things like this. It's the idea of, can I trust you to be there for me when I'm upset? Because I was upset the other day, and you were just so absent. You were so numb, like you didn't engage the moment. Like that creates this tension, conflict. Or can I trust you to choose me over your mother? That's a good one, right? Some of you guys would say, yes, can I do that? That can create some conflict. Or can I trust you to provide for our family? You as a man, you're called to provide. As a woman, you're called to provide. I mean, can I trust you to do that? Can I trust you to choose me over your friends? I mean, you keep going out with the girls. You keep going out with the guys. Like, can I trust you to stay with me, to prioritize me? Can I trust you not to take drugs? I need your mind. I need you fully present. And when you're numbed out, the kids see it. When you're numbed out, I see it. I need you present with me so I can trust you. Can I trust you to be faithful to me for the rest of our lives? Can I trust that? That's a big deal. Can I trust you to be honest with me? Hey, when you mess up, will you just tell me the truth as a friend? When you mess up, will you just tell me the truth as a family member? Can I trust you to be intentional with our children? I mean, we only get one shot at this. Can we just be intentional with our kids? Or can I trust you to manage our finances well? Can I trust you with that? And we could go on and on, but I think you get the point. Is at the end of the day, that trust is the big reason behind so much of the conflict and the adulting years that are difficult. So, let's just think about this. If trust is that big of a deal, if it's like if you have trust, it doesn't make adulting perfect, it just makes it far better. And the absence of trust makes adulting far harder, if that's true. If trust is one of the most commonly used words in our English language, where 1.8 billion search results, 60,000 books. If trust is kind of the catalyst of all the conflict that happens in our life, if all that's true, then just think about this. What do you think God, your heavenly Father, who's 100% for you and loves you, what do you think he would say about the whole topic of trust? Well, the cool thing is we know. We get some insight into this. And we get some insight into what God would think about trust from a man by the name of Paul. Maybe you've heard him referred to as the Apostle Paul or Saint Paul. Paul has a fascinating story, really does. And every time I talk about him, I'm always like, gosh, I wish we had several Sundays to talk about him because his story is so rich. But in summary, Paul had a radical conversion in the first century. Paul was a man who hated Christians. He did everything in his power to stomp it out. He thought it was a cult. He was like, get rid of it. He leveraged his power and authority to arrest followers of Jesus and to have them murdered. Think about this guy. And then one day he comes face to face with a resurrected Jesus Christ. And he goes, I was wrong. And then he spent the rest of his life traveling around the Mediterranean rim with a very simple message. You can have peace with God, you really can. And it's simple. It's through faith in Jesus Christ. Jesus removed the obstacle to your peace with God, which is sin. He has paid for it in full. And the reason you can believe that is because he rose from the dead. And Paul was responsible for most historians would agree that Paul had the most, impact on Christianity in the first century. He was so prolific. And one of the places Paul went to spread this incredible message was a city called Corinth. Now, Corinth was a very strategic city. It was a port city. It was a capital of that geographic area. And if you could use your imagination a second, and if we could pretend we were back in first century and we could drive and we had vehicles and they had roads, and you were driving into the city of Corinth, here's what you would see as you drive into the city. Welcome to fabulous Corinth. You would actually see that sign. I can almost guarantee it. And then when you go in the city of Corinth and you hang out in this city and everybody's like walking around, you're like, everybody wears this shirt in Corinth. And the shirt they wear is this one. What happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. Because this city was a wild city. This city was known for its sexual promiscuity. I mean, it was rampant. It was everywhere. It was the adult playground for adults. I mean, it was a place that, hey, what happened there stayed there. The bold, the rich, the beautiful, the famous, the talented, they either lived there or they had a place there. I mean, this was Corinth. So let's think about this. Imagine being Paul and being a missionary to a place like this where it was so provocative. Everything went. Do whatever feels good. No consequence ever. And you go in there with this message. Hey, can we talk about this guy named Jesus? Can we talk about this thing called sin, which he came to, pay for, atone? Imagine that. Well, that's what Paul did. Went into the city of Corinth, shared this incredible news that it's simple. You can have peace with God. And so many Corinthians put their trust in Christ, but man, they struggled. They really struggled because the pressures and the pulls and, the influence of their culture. They struggle with things of, so much sexual promiscuity. I mean, one guy's sleeping with his stepmother and they're like, okay. And they ask Paul these questions all the time. They were like, Paul, how do we figure that one out? How do we do, now that we're a follower of Jesus, how do I deal with that situation that's going on? And when they took communion as a church, imagine this, like they just kept getting drunk. They were like, whoo, communion time, And they kept getting drunk and they're like, Paul, man, this is just part of our culture. What do we do with this? How do we act, They talked about situations where, hey, she believes in Jesus, but her husband doesn't, and her husband's, off with the temple prostitutes. So, Paul, how do you figure that one out as a follower of Jesus Christ? Imagine these kind of questions. Well, Paul and the Corinthians went back and forth in the letter of Corinthians. And one of the things he addressed was disunity. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he talks about this whole disunity because in their church, they had these brilliant people, super talented people, rich and famous. And so they were all kind of, trying to get to the highest position. They were like, no, let me teach. No, let me do this. No, I'm more important than you. No, I'm more important than you. And so all these fractions and brokenness in the church, and they're like, Paul, how do we deal with the disunity in the church? And Paul begins to explain, here's how you need to think about this. As a follower of Christ, here's what I would say. And he introduces to them to one word, which is like glue when it comes to unity. He introduces them to love. Love. Now, here's what you've got to know. When Paul thought about love, when Paul thought about this idea of love, he didn't think about it oftentimes like our culture does, or like maybe your friends and family, or maybe even like you do. Because when Paul thought of love, immediately his mind went to Jesus Christ. And he went to this and he says, Jesus said, a new command I give you. He had to be thinking about this. That Jesus in this one statement said, hey, I'm going to summarize all the thous and thou shalt nots. I'm going to summarize all the commands, I'm going to make it so simple for you for the rest of your life. It's now just one command as a follower of Jesus Christ. It's brand new. Love one another. Thank you, Jesus. What does that look like? How do you define that? And he defines it and he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. That's the definition of love. Now that has implications. And here's the implications. If you're here today and you're not a Christian, if you're here today and you're not a follower of Christ and you came because of him or her, maybe, for whatever reason, I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm so grateful that you're listening online. I really am, and I respect that. But when it comes to love, you can define love if you're not a follower of Christ, you can define love any way you want. You can define love between people any way you want. You can say, hey, this is what it means to love one another. This is a definition of love. In culture, this is how we should love. You are free to define that any way you want. But if you're a follower of Christ, you don't have that luxury. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ and you've put your trust and faith in him, you don't get to do that because Jesus Christ defined it for us. And Paul knew it. So when Paul's thinking of this idea of love, he's not going, hey, here's my personal opinions and my thoughts and my feelings, and that all kind of informs the way I define love. No, he's thinking of one thing. How did Jesus love me? And what did Jesus say about love? And he begins to think, and as he thinks, he begins to write this down and says, okay, here's what love requires of you. Here's how you move from disunity to unity. You do what love requires of you. And then he writes this. He says, love is large and incredibly patient. Now, guys, this is the Passion Translation. I love this translation of the scriptures because this takes this ancient language and contextualizes it to our modern day language. I love it. And look at the way that it's written. Love is large and incredibly patient. Now, you've got to know, he's thinking about Jesus. Jesus on the other side of the tax collectors, prostitutes, sinners. People have been excommunicated from the temple. People have been told their whole life, you're no good. God's angry at you. His fire is coming from heaven. He was so patient. And he was so patient with his disciples. His disciples constantly didn't get what he was talking about. They're like, what, Jesus, what? And he's like, so patient. And Paul's pulling from that, going, okay, if love's defined by the life of Christ, love is big in patience, because that's what Jesus was. And then he went on. Love is gentle and consistently kind to all. It refuses to be jealous when blessings come to someone else. When somebody gets blessed with what you want to be blessed with, he says, love requires you to celebrate that, to authentically go, that is awesome, you got the promotion. That is awesome, you got that kind of vacation. Wow. Love requires us to celebrate that, and love is gentle. And again, you know he had to be thinking of Christ. When Jesus said these words, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened. You tired? You worn out? Come to me. And I am gentle, and I will give you rest for your souls. He had to be thinking, that's Jesus. Love is gentle. And then he says, love does not brag about one's achievements, nor inflate its own importance. It's not selfish. Love does not traffic in shame and disrespect, going around, hey, look at you, disrespect this, looking for opportunities for that, nor selfishly seek its own honor. That's not love. And then Paul thinks more about Christ, and he says this. He says, love is not easily irritated or quick to take offense. Think about how many times Jesus was falsely accused and how calm he was and how he didn't reflect the same that they reflected to him. Love joyfully celebrates honesty and finds no delight in what is wrong. Jesus walked around sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors, people who were radically different from him, who had a radically different theology and doctrine. And he didn't sit there and go, oh, look at your theology, look at your doctrine, look at your life, look at you. That's not what he did, because that's not what love requires of us. Love was radically different and defined by Jesus Christ. And then Paul says our word that we're talking about today. Then he says, love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails at making adulting better. So if you had to look at this word trust, this is what we're talking about today, and you had to go, what does this mean? Paul, give us the context. What are you saying? It's really interesting because Paul uses two Greek words in this as he's describing what love requires of us to do. What love requires of us to do is trust. What do you mean, Paul? He uses these two Greek words, and they literally mean this. They mean to believe, to entrust, all, every. That's the literal Greek interpretation, and Paul's writing this letter in Greek. So it's this idea, if you had to take what Paul's saying in its right context, and you had to begin to go, okay, put it in some common language, like what does it mean for us today? We would take to believe all, to entrust, we would say this, we would say what it looks like is trust consistently looks for the most generous explanation. We would say Paul's getting to the point that trust continually gives the most favorable interpretation. Or we would say trust never gives up believing the best. Man, in a relationship, when there's a gap between what I'm experiencing and what I expected, goodness, it feels so good when somebody just says, I'm going to choose to believe the best. I'm going to choose the most generous explanation. Isn't that true? You running late, you didn't deliver something you said you'd deliver, and somebody comes to you and they don't freak out on you. They just say, hey, I bet there's a good reason. Doesn't that feel so full of trust? Now, that's really helpful for Paul to give us that kind of context. But then the question becomes, how do we bring it to our everyday life? Like moment by moment, everyday life. How do we make it even more granular to help us move to a place where adulting is better? As I was thinking about that this week, I ran across Dr. Gottman's definition of trust. And I'm telling you guys, this is the best definition I've ever heard in terms of practical terms. Dr. Gottman says when it comes to trust, he says, the research says trust is built in very small moments. That in every single relational interaction you have, in every interaction you have, you've basically got two choices. You can connect in that relational interaction, or you can walk away. You can connect, or you can walk away. It's one marble at a time. That's where trust is built. And so I read that, and I'm thinking this week, well, yeah, I've experienced it. I think we all have. And it reminded me of something that happened a few weeks ago. And a few weeks ago, I'd got done with work, and I'd been here, I got here for an early morning meeting, stayed till, pretty late. And so I was pretty tired, and you guys have experienced long days like that before. And so I'm driving home, and I'm pretty tired, and all I'm thinking to myself is, man, I can't wait to get home. I'm going to go in my bathroom, wash up, put my shorts on, go on the porch, hang out, just kind of, chill out a little bit, and just, it'd be awesome. So that's all I'm thinking, like, just go home, get your shorts, go on the porch, just hang out, just like relax. And I walk in my doors, and I walk into the kitchen, and I look over there, and I see my beautiful wife, Jill. And it's clear to me something's wrong with her. And it was that moment. And I thought, all I want to do is go to the bathroom. I just want to put my shorts on. I don't have the energy for this. But then I looked, and I said, but this is the moment. And in that moment, I walked up behind her, I wrapped my arms around her, and I just said, babe, how are you doing? How are you doing? And she said, it's been a hard day. And we began to talk, and we began to have a conversation. And what happened is it was just one moment, one marble, that made a deposit for connection. And when we make that choice, because it ultimately is a choice, to that small moment of trust, it builds trust. But the opposite is true as well. Guys, I can't tell you how many times that same scenario has presented itself, and I'm tired, long day or whatever, and I walk in the house and I see Jill, and I'm like, I could, but I'm not, and I walk on by. I can't tell you how many times that happens. And every time that happens, it's like I'm just taking one of these out of the jar. Now, this is important to understand. It's not one marble is going to make or break your relationship. It's not, hey, you missed that opportunity, ooh, it's all over. No, it's very, very small. The research says it takes time. It's slow. In other words, think about it this way, that when you withdraw those marbles, it erodes trust, but it's slow. It takes time. It slowly builds trust. It's one marble at a time. And equally so, if you miss those moments, don't beat yourself up. You're human, I'm human. We all miss moments like that, right? But when you miss a moment, it's not a big deal. It's like, it's just a moment. And it kind of goes back and forth that you slowly build or you can gradually erode trust, marble by marble. And every interaction is an opportunity to connect or to walk away, to build or to erode. Now, let me hit the pause button real quick. And I think I have to address something in this conversation where we're talking about relationships and trust. Here's what I realize, is that in the room like this, or those of you watching, listening online, is that at the end of the day, there are things in life that can actually make a much bigger splash. That there are things in life that if I was, to pour this whole marble jar out, which, I'm tempted to do, but it'd create a huge mess. But there are things in life that can empty the entire jar. That there are things in life, called betrayal and several other things, that can completely make that marble jar that is full can kind of put a big old cut and say, you know what? Because of this one big thing, my jar is empty. There are betrayals of trust that are that big. And guys, that is an important conversation. That is another teaching for another day. But I just want to acknowledge that because I've seen it, and I know that's possible when it comes to relationships, when it comes to trust. And I've said on the other side of so many individuals that if you heard their stories, you would go, that's the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst thing you could ever do to a person. And I've watched it. I've listened to it. I've felt it. And I've also watched people take steps to redeem to reconcile something that no one on planet Earth would say would be reconcilable. I've watched that. And every time I watch people take those steps, there's really three things they do to get to a place of reconciliation when all the marbles have been emptied. The three things are this. It's to atone, attune, and attach. Atone is the whole idea of confession, the whole idea of be honest, the whole idea of take a radical inventory of what actually happened. Here's what I did. And atone is all about forgiveness. That can take, years. And then attune, it's how do we start this relationship over? You begin to do one marble at a time. You attune the relationship because now it's a brand new relationship. And ultimately you attach, and that has everything to do with intimacy. And that's your way forward. And that could be a long, complicated process. Now, I just want to acknowledge that because I know when we're talking about relationships and trust, there are some of you that would go, well, Buck, I've had those moments that aren't one marble, but all the marbles got empty. And I've got to acknowledge that. And again, that's a teaching for another day. That's all about betrayal and how do you get healing. Today, what we're talking about are small deposits, small moments of trust that make adulting better. So, as you think about all of that, everything we've talked about today, let me ask you this question. Are your marble jar moments building or eroding trust? This is for you. This is your work. As you think about your marriage, as you think about your parents, as you think about your dating relationships, as you think about your friendships, as you think about your colleagues at work, as you think about people at school or people on your team, the things that you're doing, the marble jar moments, is it building trust or is it eroding trust? Because depending on what you do with this can either build or erode the trust in that relationship. Depending what you do with this moment, over time, these consistent moments can invite intimacy into the relationship, which intimacy at the end of the day is the secret sauce to incredible relationships, or it can drain the intimacy out of a relationship. And what you do with this one marble consistently can make adulting hard or can make adulting much better. The bottom line is adulting gets better when we choose to love as Christ loved us with consistent and small moments of trust. So let me ask, as we wrap up our time, I just want to ask a few questions to get us thinking as we walk out. For you, marble jar moment, this is that moment. Is there a text or a call you need to make? In your life, as you think about your relationships, your adulting, is there a text that you need to send and you know you need to send it because that's your moment? Is there a phone call that you need to make because that person is going through whatever, or he or she, and you know you need to make it? That's your moment to make the deposit. Is there anything like that? Are you growing apathetic with moments of trust? In your relationships, have you gotten to the place to go, oh, that's what mom always does. That's what dad always, I expect that now. Oh, that's what we worked out our roles and she does this and I do this or they, whatever. And so I expect it. Is there apathy that's setting in? Because I'm just telling you, when apathy begins to set in and you lose intentionality, you are losing trust. Is there someone you need to hug? Jill, my beautiful wife, she loves hugs, and I'm not a hugger. Like, if you try to hug me, I'm like, oh, what do I do? But for her, man, hugs are big. Is there someone in your life, just one deposit? It's just one moment that you need to hug. Is there a thank you that needs to be said? Do you need to send a thank you text? Do you need to verbally look somebody in the eyes and go, oh my gosh, and you do this every day. I just want to thank you for what you do. Is there something meaningful to him or her that you need to make meaningful to you? I know he loves UFC, and I know you don't. You're like, it's fighting, it's violent, I hate it. But it's meaningful to him. Maybe it's time to make it meaningful to you. Or I know she loves gardening, and you're like, oh my gosh, gag me with a spoon, gardening. Right? But it's meaningful to her. It's one moment to choose to make it meaningful to you. Leads to deposits of trust. Is there a mistake you need to own? Because let me just say, the longer you play the blame game, the longer you say, well, if she would, if he would, if she would, if he, it's not going to work. You got to get off that train quick. The moment you begin to go, okay, they have their own piece of the pie, but I've got to own my piece of the pie. What did I do? You know, I just want to say I'm sorry for this piece of the pie. Whew. That's a trust builder. Do you have a problem with gossiping? When somebody shares their vault with you, do you know how sacred what they shared with you is? When you know some information about people or about things, I mean, is that your information to share? I'm just telling you, you want to evaporate trust quick? Gossip. When it comes to gossiping, I have one word: stop. Stop. It's killing your relationships. And more importantly, it's killing you. To build relationships off gossip, oh, hey, come close to me. I'll tell you about him. I'll tell you about her. I'll tell you about them. That's no way to build a relationship that's going to last. Do you have an area that you're gossiping? Are you creating space for him or her to disagree and listening? I know you may have a different opinion. I'd love to hear that. I know you may see this differently when it comes to our kids or when it comes to our finances or when it comes to whatever it may be. I'd love to hear that. Do you know what a huge deposit? I mean, it's one marble, but it's just those consistent deposits makes all the difference. Do you consistently choose the most generous explanation? Oh, you're late again, you know? This is why. Do you project things you don't know on your children? Yeah, I know they got a bad grade. I know they stayed out longer. I know they had that text or that Snapchat thing. Are you projecting, well, this is what it means? Or you just go, no. One of the greatest trust builders with my son or daughter is to have the most generous explanation and just go with what I know, until you find something out. Is there a love note you should write? Jill loves those sticky notes. And if I write just a little message and put it on her computer so when she opens her computer, it just says, oh, thinking of you and you're beautiful, that's it, small deposit. That goes such a long ways. Guys, we could go on and on and on, but I think you get the point. The bottom line is this, is that for your life and my life, if we're going to move to a place to make adulting better, it doesn't make it perfect. I don't think you can figure a perfect adulting years out, but to make it better, to make it richer, to make it more meaningful, to make it to where you feel radically different than perhaps you feel. We've got to make a choice. And it honestly is a choice to do what love requires of us. And what love requires of us is to trust these small moments, these marble jar moments that make adulting better. Let me pray for us. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for your grace and your love. Thank you that you've loved us. Thank you that you've modeled what love looks like. You've defined it by your Son, Jesus Christ. It's so helpful. God, I just pray with what we're talking about today. I know relationships are super complex, and you know that far more than I. And so, Father, would you just meet each of us as we walk out today, as we think about just a practical way we could make one small deposit, one marble in that jar. Would you show us what that would be? And would you give us the courage? Would you remind us to actually do it? God, I trust you with these things. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I won't see you next week, just the week after. Have a great week.